Sarah Mitchell wiped the sweat from her forehead as she adjusted her backpack straps. The September morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of the Great Smoky Mountains, casting dancing shadows on the forest floor. She had been hiking alone for 3 hours, following an old trail that wound deeper into the wilderness than most tourists dared to venture. At 28, Sarah was an experienced wilderness photographer who had spent years capturing the untamed beauty of America's national parks. Her camera equipment bounced gently against her hip as she navigated the rocky terrain, searching for the perfect shot of the changing autumn leaves. The solitude never bothered her. In fact, she preferred it to the crowded viewing areas where families posed for selfies. The sound reached her ears before she saw anything unusual. It started as a low rumble like distant thunder, but grew more menacing with each passing second. Sarah froze, her heart suddenly pounding as she recognized the unmistakable sound of a bear's growl. Through the thick undergrowth ahead, she could make out movement and heard something else that made her blood run cold. A child's terrified scream. Without thinking, Sarah dropped her backpack and grabbed the bear spray from her belt. She pushed through the brambles, branches tearing at her jacket, following the desperate cries for help. What she found in the small clearing ahead would change her life forever. A massive grizzly bear, easily 8 feet tall when standing on its hind legs, had cornered a young boy against a fallen log. The child couldn't have been more than 12 years old, with long black hair and traditional Cherokee clothing that seemed oddly out of place in the modern wilderness. His dark eyes were wide with terror as he pressed himself against the rotting wood, nowhere left to run. The bear was clearly agitated, swinging its enormous paws and snapping its jaws. Sarah could see fresh scratches on the boy's arm where the animal had already made contact. In that moment, every rational thought about bear safety protocols fled her mind. She saw only a child in mortal danger. "Hey!" Sarah shouted at the top of her lungs, waving her arms above her head. "Over here, you big ugly monster." The grizzly's massive head swung toward her, its small black eyes focusing on this new threat. For a terrifying moment, Sarah thought she had made a fatal mistake. The bear was enormous, probably weighing over 600 pounds, and she was just a woman with a can of pepper spray. But the distraction worked exactly as she hoped. The boy seized his chance and scrambled over the fallen log, putting distance between himself and the predator. The grizzly, now confused by having 2 potential targets, seemed to weigh its options. Sarah's hands shook as she aimed the bear spray, knowing she would only get 1 shot. The wind was blowing in the wrong direction, and if she missed or the spray didn't work, both she and the boy would likely die in this remote forest clearing. The bear took a step toward her, then another. Its massive paws made no sound on the forest floor, but Sarah could hear its heavy breathing and see the saliva dripping from its open mouth. She waited until the animal was close enough that she couldn't possibly miss, then pressed the trigger. The orange spray shot out in a wide arc, hitting the grizzly directly in the face. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The bear roared in pain and confusion, pawing at its eyes and nose. It spun around twice, completely disoriented, then crashed through the underbrush away from them. Sarah's legs nearly gave out as the adrenaline left her system. She turned to check on the boy and found him staring at her with an expression of awe and gratitude that transcended language barriers. He spoke to her in what she assumed was Cherokee, his voice still shaking from the encounter. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, examining his scratched arm. The wounds weren't deep, but they needed attention. "What's your name?" The boy seemed to understand some English. "Ayanna," he said, pointing to himself. Then he gestured toward her and spoke in Cherokee again. Words she couldn't understand, but that clearly conveyed deep thankfulness. As Sarah cleaned his wounds with water from her bottle and bandaged them with strips torn from her spare shirt, she wondered what a Cherokee boy in traditional dress was doing alone in these mountains. But those questions would have to wait. The most important thing now was getting him to safety and making sure the bear was truly gone. What neither Sarah nor young Ayanna knew was that their brief but harrowing encounter had been witnessed from a distance. Hidden among the trees, several Cherokee men had been tracking the boy, following ancient protocols when one of their own wandered too far from the ceremonial grounds. They had seen everything: the bear attack, Sarah's fearless intervention, and her gentle care for the injured child. In Cherokee tradition, such an act of selfless bravery, especially toward one of their children, carried profound significance. As they watched Sarah tend to Ayanna's wounds, Speaking softly to calm his fears despite not sharing his language, the watchers knew they had witnessed something that would ripple through their community in ways the white woman could never imagine. Sarah helped Ayanna to his feet, supporting his weight as they slowly made their way back toward the main trail. The boy's face was pale, and she could tell he was still in shock from the bear attack. Every few steps he would glance nervously over his shoulder, as if expecting the grizzly to return. They had walked for nearly 20 minutes when Sarah heard voices calling through the forest. The sounds grew louder, and she realized multiple people were searching for something or someone. Ayanna's face immediately brightened, and he called out in Cherokee, his voice echoing through the trees. Within moments, 3 Cherokee men emerged from the forest ahead of them. They were dressed in a mixture of modern hiking gear and traditional elements: leather vests, beaded jewelry, and long hair braided with feathers. The oldest of the group, a man with silver-streaked hair and weathered hands, rushed forward and embraced Ayanna, speaking rapidly in their native language. Sarah stepped back, suddenly feeling like an outsider in this emotional reunion. She watched as the man examined Ayanna's bandaged arm, then turned his attention to her. His dark eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable, but not in a threatening way. It was more like he was trying to read her very soul. "You are the one who saved our boy," he said in heavily accented English. His voice was deep and carried the weight of authority. "I am Joseph Stonecrow, elder of the Eastern Band Cherokee. This is my grandson, Ayanna." Sarah nodded, still not fully understanding the significance of what had happened. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I was just hiking and heard him screaming." Anyone would have done the same thing. Joseph's expression grew serious. "No," he said firmly. "Not anyone would face a grizzly bear to save a Cherokee child. We saw what you did. My son William and my nephew Daniel were tracking Ayanna when he wandered from our ceremonial grounds." He gestured to the 2 younger men, who nodded respectfully at Sarah. "You were watching?" Sarah felt a flush of embarrassment. "Why didn't you help him?" "We were too far away," William explained, his English more fluent than his father's. "By the time we reached the ridge and could see what was happening, you had already acted. We saw you risk your life for a child who was a stranger to you." Daniel, the youngest of the group, spoke up. "In our tradition, such an act creates bonds that cannot be broken. You have shown the true spirit of what we call gadugi, cooperative service for the good of all." Sarah shook her head, feeling overwhelmed. "I really don't need any kind of reward or recognition. I'm just glad Ayanna is safe." Joseph placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "This is not about reward, Sarah Mitchell. This is about honor and respect. You have earned something that cannot be given, only earned through courage and selflessness." As they walked together back toward the trailhead, Joseph explained that Ayanna had been participating in a traditional coming-of-age ceremony. Young Cherokee boys were expected to spend time alone in the forest, connecting with nature and their ancestors. But Ayanna had wandered farther than intended and encountered the bear while trying to find his way back to the ceremonial grounds. He was supposed to return with a token from the forest, Joseph said, something that would represent his transition from boyhood to young manhood. Instead, he returns with a much greater gift: the knowledge that there are still people in this world who will risk everything to help others. Sarah learned that the Stonecrow family were not just any Cherokee people, but direct descendants of chiefs who had led their people during some of the darkest periods in their history. Joseph himself served on the tribal council and was considered one of the most respected spiritual leaders in their community. When they reached Sarah's car at the trailhead parking area, Joseph turned to her with a serious expression. "In 3 days we hold the Harvest Moon ceremony. It is a time when our people give thanks for the blessings of the year and honor those who have shown great courage or wisdom. I invite you to join us as our honored guest." Sarah felt touched but uncertain. "I don't know anything about your customs or traditions. I wouldn't want to accidentally disrespect anyone." "You have already shown the greatest respect possible," Joseph replied. "You valued the life of our child above your own safety. There is no greater honor in Cherokee culture." Ayanna, who had been quiet during most of the conversation, approached Sarah and pressed something into her hand. It was a small piece of carved bone, shaped like a bear, with intricate patterns etched into its surface. "He made this during his ceremony preparation," William translated as Ayanna spoke. "He wants you to have it. He says you fought the bear spirit and won, so now you carry its strength." Sarah looked down at the carving. feeling the weight of its significance, even though she didn't fully understand it. "Tell him I'm honored, but I can't accept something so meaningful." Joseph shook his head. To refuse would be an insult. "He offers you this gift freely, from his heart. It represents his gratitude and his recognition of your courage." As Sarah drove away from the mountains that evening, the bone carving sat on her dashboard, catching the light from the setting sun. She had no idea that her spontaneous act of bravery had already been discussed among the Cherokee elders, or that phone calls were being made throughout the community about the white woman who had faced a grizzly bear to save one of their children. In Cherokee tradition, such acts were not forgotten or taken lightly. They became part of the oral history, stories passed down through generations, but more importantly, they created obligations and bonds that extended far beyond simple gratitude. Sarah Mitchell had unknowingly stepped into a world of ancient customs and sacred traditions, and her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. Sarah spent the next 2 days trying to process what had happened in the mountains. She researched Cherokee culture online, wanting to understand the significance of Joseph's invitation and Ayanna's gift. The more she learned about their traditions of honor, reciprocity, and community bonds, the more she realized that her impulsive act of bravery had consequences she was only beginning to grasp. Her small apartment in Asheville felt different now, as if the bone carving on her coffee table had somehow changed the energy of her entire living space. She found herself staring at it frequently, running her fingers over the intricate patterns that depicted the bear in various poses. Standing, walking, protecting its young. On the second evening, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, but she answered anyway. "Miss Mitchell, this is William Stonecrow. We met in the forest." Sarah sat up straighter. "Of course, yes. How is Ayanna doing?" "He is well, thanks to you. But I am calling about the ceremony tomorrow night. My father asked me to provide you with directions to our ceremonial grounds, if you have decided to accept our invitation." Sarah had been wrestling with this decision. Part of her felt like she would be intruding on something sacred and private, but another part of her was deeply curious about Cherokee culture and genuinely wanted to honor the connection she had made with Ayanna and his family. "I would be honored to attend," she said finally, "but I'm still worried about knowing the proper etiquette." William's warm laugh came through the phone. "Do not worry. We will guide you. Just bring yourself in an open heart. Oh, and dress warmly. We will be outdoors, and mountain nights can be cold in late September." The next evening, Sarah followed William's detailed directions along winding mountain roads that led deeper into Cherokee territory than she had ever ventured. Her headlights illuminated narrow paths that seemed barely wide enough for her car, until finally she saw the warm glow of multiple fires in a large clearing ahead. As she parked among a dozen other vehicles, Sarah felt her nerves flutter. Through the trees, she could see dozens of people gathered around several fire circles, their voices carrying the rhythmic cadence of Cherokee chanting, mixed with the deep throb of traditional drums. Joseph Stonecrow emerged from the group and approached her car. In the firelight, wearing full ceremonial dress including an elaborate feathered headdress, he looked like a figure from another time. But his smile was warm and welcoming as he opened her door. "Sarah Mitchell, you honor us with your presence," he said formally. "Come. Let me introduce you to our people." Sarah had expected to be introduced to a few family members, but what happened next took her breath away. Joseph led her to the center of the largest fire circle, where at least 60 Cherokee people had gathered. The drums fell silent and all conversation stopped as Joseph raised his hand. "My people," he said in a voice that carried clearly across the clearing, speaking first in Cherokee, then in English. 3 days ago, this woman risked her life to save our child Ayanna from a grizzly bear. She faced death without hesitation to protect one of our own. Tonight we honor her courage. What followed was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. One by one, Cherokee people approached her. Elders, middle-aged adults, teenagers, and children. Each person had been briefed on what had happened, and each offered their personal thanks. Some spoke in English, others in Cherokee with translation provided, but all conveyed the same message of profound gratitude and respect. An elderly woman named Mary Sequoia, introduced as the tribe's most respected storyteller, took Sarah's hands in her weathered ones. "In our tradition," she said, "when someone saves the life of a Cherokee child, they become family. Not just to that child's blood relatives, but to all Cherokee people. You are now our daughter, our sister, our protector." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. I don't understand. All I did was what anyone should do. But you are not anyone, Mary replied. You are someone who acted with courage when others might have fled. You are someone who saw a Cherokee child in danger and did not hesitate because he was different from you. This makes you special among people. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself drawn into the ceremonial activities. She watched mesmerized as dancers moved around the fires in intricate patterns, their traditional regalia catching the light. The drums seemed to beat in rhythm with her own heartbeat, and the chanting voices created harmonies that spoke to something deep in her soul. Ayanna appeared at her side, now wearing ceremonial dress that marked him as having successfully completed his coming-of-age ritual. Through William's translation, he told her that the elders had declared his encounter with the bear and her rescue to be a powerful spiritual sign. Instead of returning with a simple token from the forest, he had returned with a story that would be told for generations. He says the spirits sent you to him, William translated. He says you carry the strength of the bear now, and that makes you a protector of all Cherokee children, not just him. As the ceremony reached its climax, Joseph Stonecrow called for silence once again. He approached Sarah carrying an ornate wooden staff decorated with feathers, beads, and carved symbols. Sarah Mitchell, he said solemnly, by the authority granted to me by our ancestors and our people, I name you Yona Gallohisdi, she who fights bears. This is now your Cherokee name, and it carries with it all the rights and protections of our tribe. The crowd erupted in cheers and traditional calls of approval. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. She understood that she was being offered something precious, acceptance into a community that had survived centuries of persecution and displacement, yet still maintained their ancient traditions of honor and kinship. But she also sensed that with this honor came responsibilities she didn't yet understand. As the celebration continued around her, Sarah realized that her life had just taken a turn she could never have anticipated when she set out for a simple photography hike just 3 days earlier. The Cherokee people were claiming her as one of their own, and something in her heart told her that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything about who she thought she was. The weeks following the ceremony brought changes to Sarah's life that she could never have anticipated. Word of her Cherokee adoption spread through the community faster than wildfire, and she began receiving invitations to events, requests for help, and visits from Cherokee families throughout the region. At first, Sarah assumed the novelty would wear off, that people would eventually forget about the white woman who had saved Ayanna from the bear. But she quickly learned that Cherokee memory is long, and their traditions of reciprocity run deep. Her phone rang constantly with invitations to birthdays, graduations, and family gatherings. Cherokee mothers introduced her to their children as Yona Gallohisdi, the one who fights bears to protect our young. The most surprising development came when Sarah received a call from the Cherokee Nation's Cultural Preservation Office. They wanted to hire her as a documentary photographer to help record traditional ceremonies and community events. Her wilderness photography skills, combined with her new status as a trusted family member, made her uniquely qualified for the sensitive work of documenting sacred traditions that were rarely shared with outsiders. We need someone who understands both the technical aspects of photography and the spiritual significance of what she's recording, explained Dr. Robert Swimmer, the office director. Your honorary adoption gives you access to ceremonies that no other non-Cherokee photographer would ever be permitted to witness. Sarah accepted the position, not for the money, but because she felt a growing responsibility to use her skills to help preserve the Cherokee culture that had so warmly embraced her. Her first assignment was to photograph the annual green corn ceremony, one of the most important celebrations in the Cherokee calendar. As she worked throughout the summer and early fall, documenting everything from stomp dances to traditional craft making, Sarah noticed something remarkable happening. Cherokee people didn't just tolerate her presence. They actively protected and defended her as one of their own. This became crystal clear when a group of tourists at a public event began making disparaging comments about another white person appropriating Native culture. Before Sarah could even respond, 3 Cherokee women immediately stepped in to confront the critics. That woman saved one of our children from a grizzly bear, declared Nancy Ridge, a teacher at the Cherokee school. She's earned her place here through courage and sacrifice. Can you say the same? The tourist quickly backed down. But the incident left Sarah with a profound understanding of how completely the Cherokee community had claimed her. She wasn't just an honored guest anymore. She was family, with all the fierce loyalty that entailed. Her relationship with Ayanna and his extended family deepened as well. The boy, now fully recovered from his bear encounter, had taken to introducing Sarah as his bear-fighting sister to anyone who would listen. His grandfather Joseph began including her in private family ceremonies and asking her advice on community matters. "Your perspective is valuable to us," Joseph explained during one of their long conversations around his family's fire. "You see our traditions with fresh eyes, but you also understand their importance. This helps us figure out which customs we must preserve exactly as they are, and which ones can adapt to modern times while keeping their sacred meaning." Sarah found herself becoming an unofficial bridge between the Cherokee community and the outside world. Local newspapers wanted to interview her about Cherokee culture. Television producers called about documentary opportunities. Government officials sought her input on tourism policies that affected Cherokee sacred sites. But it was her growing friendship with the Cherokee women that truly changed her understanding of what family means. They taught her traditional crafts like basket weaving and pottery making. They shared stories passed down through generations about Cherokee, heroines who had protected their people during the darkest times in their history. "You remind us of our ancestor Nancy Ward," explained Mary Sequoia during one of their craft sessions. "She was known as the beloved woman, and she often protected Cherokee people by building bridges with white settlers who had good hearts. Like you, she believed that courage and kindness can overcome fear and hatred." Sarah learned that in Cherokee tradition, being named for protective strength carried specific obligations. As she who fights bears, she was expected to serve as a guardian and protector, not just for Ayanna, but for the entire Cherokee community. This meant being available when families faced crises, advocating for Cherokee interests in the broader community, and using her unique position to challenge stereotypes and misconceptions about Native people. These responsibilities became real when Sarah received a frantic phone call from William Stonecrow. His teenage daughter Maria had been arrested in Asheville on charges that the family insisted were fabricated. The police claimed the girl had been shoplifting, but Cherokee witnesses said she had been targeted because of her appearance and traditional jewelry. "They won't listen to us," William said desperately. "But they might listen to you. Maria needs someone to speak for her who understands both worlds." Sarah didn't hesitate. She called in favors from her contacts in the photography world, arranged for a respected civil rights lawyer to take the case, and personally vouched for Maria's character with the court system. The charges were eventually dropped, but the incident reinforced Sarah's understanding that her adoption into the Cherokee family came with real-world responsibilities. As autumn turned to winter, Sarah realized that her entire identity had shifted. She no longer thought of herself as just a wilderness photographer who happened to help a Cherokee boy. She had become Sarah Mitchell, also known as Yona Gallohisty, honorary Cherokee, protector of the people, bridge between worlds. The bone carving that Ayanna had given her now sat in a place of honor in her home, surrounded by other gifts from Cherokee families, pottery, woven baskets, beaded jewelry, and handmade clothes. But more importantly, her phone contacts had expanded to include dozens of Cherokee families who called her for everything from career advice to help with college applications to support during medical crises. She had gained not just a new name and ceremonial adoption, but an entire extended family that spanned several states and included hundreds of people who considered her one of their own. The bear encounter had lasted less than 5 minutes, but its consequences were reshaping her entire life in ways that continued to unfold with each passing month. 1 year after the bear encounter, Sarah's life had transformed so completely that she barely recognized her former self. What started as a chance wildlife encounter had evolved into a deep cultural immersion that challenged everything she thought she knew about identity, family, and belonging. The Cherokee Nation had formally recognized her contributions to cultural preservation with an unprecedented honor. She became the first non-Cherokee person ever granted permission to photograph the most sacred Cherokee ceremonies, including the ancient purification rituals that were normally closed to all outsiders. This recognition came with enormous responsibility, as these photographs would be used for educational purposes and future generations of Cherokee people. But Sarah's most significant role had become something she never expected, serving as a cultural liaison and advocate for Cherokee rights in the broader community. Her unique position as an adopted Cherokee with connections in the non-native world made her invaluable for addressing conflicts and misunderstandings. The biggest test of this role came when a major hotel chain announced plans to build a resort directly adjacent to a Cherokee sacred burial ground. The company had obtained all the necessary legal permits, but they hadn't understood the spiritual significance of the location to Cherokee people. Traditional protests and legal challenges had failed to stop the project. Joseph Stone Crow approached Sarah with a request that would test everything she had learned about Cherokee values and her own commitment to her adopted family. "We need you to be our voice," he said during a private meeting with the tribal council. "You can speak to the hotel executives in ways they will understand. You know their world, but you also know our hearts. Can you help us save this sacred place?" Sarah spent weeks researching the hotel company's corporate values and environmental policies. She discovered that the CEO prided himself on sustainable tourism and cultural sensitivity. Armed with this knowledge, she arranged a meeting that would have been impossible for Cherokee representatives to obtain on their own. The presentation Sarah gave to the hotel board combined professional photography of the burial, ground with careful explanations of Cherokee spiritual beliefs. She showed them how the project would destroy not just ancient graves, but a living spiritual site that remained central to Cherokee religious practices. "Imagine if someone wanted to build a shopping mall on top of Arlington National Cemetery," Sarah told the executives. "That's the equivalent of what you're proposing to the Cherokee people. This isn't just about old bones in the ground. This is about a sacred space that connects living Cherokee families to their ancestors." But Sarah's most powerful argument was economic. She had researched other destinations where developers had worked with native communities instead of against them, creating culturally sensitive tourism that attracted visitors specifically because of its authentic respect for indigenous culture. "You have an opportunity to create something unique," she explained. "Instead of another generic resort, you could partner with the Cherokee Nation to create an educational and spiritual destination that honors this sacred space while still providing economic benefits to your company." The hotel executives were impressed by Sarah's presentation, but what really convinced them was the presence of Cherokee elders who had accompanied her to the meeting. These dignified men and women, dressed in traditional regalia, spoke quietly but powerfully about their connection to the burial ground and their hopes for protecting it for future generations. Within 6 months, the hotel company had completely redesigned their project. Instead of building directly on the sacred site, they created a partnership with the Cherokee Nation to establish a cultural center and museum that would educate visitors about Cherokee history, while generating revenue for both the tribe and the hotel. This success established Sarah as one of the most effective advocates for Cherokee interests in the region. Other tribes began asking for her help with similar conflicts. Environmental groups wanted her assistance in protecting native sacred sites. Universities invited her to speak about cross-cultural cooperation and indigenous rights. But for Sarah, the most meaningful recognition came from the Cherokee community itself. During the 2nd anniversary of her bear encounter with Ayanna, the tribal council made an announcement that stunned even her. "Sarah Mitchell, Yona Gallohisdi, has proven herself to be more than an honorary Cherokee," declared Chief Michelle Hicks during a formal ceremony. "She has shown through her actions that she carries the true spirit of our people. Tonight, we grant her something that has never been given to someone not born Cherokee: the right to speak for our nation in official matters." This meant that Sarah could now represent Cherokee interest in legal proceedings, government hearings, and corporate negotiations with the same authority as if she were an elected Cherokee official. It was an unprecedented honor that came with enormous responsibility. Ayanna, now 14 and grown tall and strong, stood with his grandfather during the ceremony. The boy who had once cowered before a grizzly bear had become a confident young man who frequently told the story of his rescue to younger children in the community. "She didn't just save my life that day," Ayanna said when asked to speak about Sarah's impact. "She saved our whole community by showing us that there are still people in the world who will stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Sarah's transformation was complete. She had evolved from a wilderness photographer seeking the perfect shot into a cultural ambassador, bridging two worlds. Her apartment was now filled with Cherokee art, and her calendar was packed with tribal meetings, ceremony invitations, and advocacy work. But perhaps the most significant change was internal. Sarah had discovered a sense of purpose and belonging that she had never experienced in her previous life. The Cherokee concept of gadugi, working together for the common good, had become her guiding principle. She realized that her encounter with the grizzly bear had been more than a moment of courage. It had been the beginning of a journey that would define the rest of her life. She had found not just a new family, but a new identity rooted in service, protection, and cultural preservation. As she looked back on the 2 years since that September morning in the mountains, Sarah understood that sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as emergencies, and sometimes saving one person's life opens the door to serving an entire community's needs. 5 years had passed since Sarah first heard Ayana's terrified screams echoing through the mountain forest. What began as a split-second decision to help a child in danger had evolved into a life completely transformed by love, loyalty, and purpose. Sarah Mitchell, now universally known as Yona Galohisti, had become one of the most respected advocates for Cherokee rights in the southeastern United States. The small apartment in Asheville had been replaced by a home on Cherokee land, built in collaboration with traditional Cherokee craftsmen and incorporating both modern conveniences and ancient architectural principles. The house served as an unofficial meeting place for Cherokee families and a safe haven for young Cherokee people pursuing education or careers in the broader community. Sarah's documentation work had expanded far beyond photography. She had co-authored 3 books about Cherokee culture, established a scholarship fund for Cherokee students studying environmental science, and created a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting native sacred sites throughout North America. Her work had been recognized by the National Geographic Society, the Smithsonian Institution, and the United Nations Indigenous Rights Council. But the greatest measure of her impact wasn't found in awards or accolades. It was visible in the lives she had touched and the changes she had helped create in the relationship between Cherokee people and their non-native neighbors. Ayana, now 18 and preparing for college, had grown into a confident young man who served as a bridge between traditional Cherokee values and modern opportunities. He credited Sarah not just with saving his life, but with showing him that courage could take many forms, from facing a grizzly bear to standing up against injustice in courtrooms and boardrooms. She taught me that being Cherokee doesn't mean living in the past. Ayana explained to a documentary crew filming the 5-year anniversary of their encounter. It means carrying our ancestors' wisdom forward and using it to create a better future for our people. The ripple effects of Sarah's advocacy work had transformed Cherokee relations with local governments, businesses, and educational institutions. The cultural center she had helped negotiate with the hotel company had become a model for respectful indigenous tourism, attracting visitors from around the world and generating millions of dollars in revenue that supported Cherokee cultural preservation programs. More importantly, Sarah's success in bridging worlds had inspired other Cherokee people to take on advocacy roles. The tribal council now included several young Cherokee professionals who had been mentored by Sarah and learned to navigate both traditional Cherokee governance and modern political systems. The loyalty that the Cherokee people had sworn to Sarah had proven to be more than ceremonial rhetoric. When Sarah faced a serious car accident that left her hospitalized for months, Cherokee families took turns caring for her, bringing traditional medicines, maintaining her home, and managing her advocacy work. The community that had claimed her as family proved that their commitment was absolute and enduring. During her recovery, Sarah had time to reflect on the extraordinary journey her life had taken. She kept a journal during those months, documenting her thoughts about identity, belonging, and the ways that single moments can reshape entire lives. "I used to think I was just a photographer who happened to help someone in need," she wrote. "Now I understand that everything in my life before that moment was preparing me for what came after. The years I spent in wilderness learning to read animal behavior, the photography skills that taught me to see details others missed, even the loneliness that made me comfortable with solitude. All of it was preparation for becoming the person the Cherokee people needed me to be. As Sarah recovered and returned to full-time advocacy work, she began planning her most ambitious project yet, a comprehensive legal and cultural framework that would provide a model for other indigenous communities seeking to protect their sacred sites and cultural practices. The project would combine traditional indigenous law with modern legal strategies, creating a new paradigm for indigenous rights advocacy. The work attracted attention from Cherokee communities across the United States, as well as from other tribal nations facing similar challenges. Sarah found herself traveling to reservations throughout the continent, sharing the strategies she had developed and learning from other indigenous advocates. But no matter how far her work took her, Sarah always returned to the mountains where her Cherokee journey had begun. Each year on the anniversary of the bear encounter, she and Ayanna hiked to the clearing where they had first met, now marked with a small stone cairn built by Cherokee youth as a memorial to courage and cross-cultural understanding. During the 5th anniversary hike, as they sat beside the cairn sharing traditional Cherokee bread that Ayanna's grandmother had made, Sarah asked him what he remembered most clearly about that terrifying day. "I remember thinking I was going to die," Ayanna said quietly. "But then I heard you shouting at that bear, and I knew someone was fighting for me. Someone who didn't even know my name was willing to risk everything to keep me safe." He paused, looking out over the forest canopy. "That's when I understood what real courage looks like. It's not about not being afraid, it's about acting anyway when someone needs you." Sarah nodded, remembering her own terror in that moment. "I was absolutely terrified, but I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to help you." "That's what makes you Cherokee in your heart," Ayanna replied. "Our people have always believed that we're responsible for protecting each other, even if it costs us everything." As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Sarah reflected on how that single moment of choice had led to a lifetime of service. The scared boy beside her had grown into a young man preparing to study environmental law, so he could continue the advocacy work she had started. The terrified woman who had grabbed a can of bear spray had become a voice for indigenous rights across North America. The Cherokee people had sworn loyalty to her that night, around the ceremonial fires. But Sarah understood now that the loyalty ran both ways. She had found her true calling in protecting and serving the community that had claimed her as family. The grizzly bear that had threatened to destroy a young life had instead created bonds that would last for generations. As they packed up to leave the sacred clearing, Sarah touched the bone carving that still hung around her neck, Ayanna's gift from that first day. It had become her most treasured possession, a daily reminder of the moment when her real life had begun. The moment when a stranger became family, when fear became courage, and when one act of bravery created ripples that would continue spreading long after she was gone. The Cherokee people had kept their promise. They had sworn loyalty to the woman who saved their child, and that loyalty had transformed both Sarah's life and their entire community. In protecting one boy from a grizzly bear, Sarah had discovered that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons or words, but with love, courage, and an unshakable commitment to standing up for what's right. The story that began with a terrified scream in a mountain clearing had become a legacy of hope, proving that in a world often divided by differences, acts of pure courage can still build bridges that last forever.